You're listening to the Nourish Child Podcast, episode number 25, Diets and Supplement Use in Young Athletes. I'm Jill Castle, registered dietitian, child nutrition expert, and host of the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of raising healthy kids inside and out. Today, we're talking about dieting and supplement use in young athletes and how to support your athlete and help him or her stay healthy and safe. You can find today's show notes with all the links I mentioned over at jillcastle.com/025. That's www.jillcastle.com/025 for episode number 25.
Welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey you, welcome back. Or if this is your first time here, thank you for tuning in and giving the Nourish Child Podcast a try. I hope you like it. Today, I'm especially excited for this episode. For one, I get to talk to so many young athletes in my practice and their parents, and they all have big questions about supplements and whether or not following a diet, either specialized or with weight loss intention, would be beneficial for their performance. So I want to talk to you about that today. I'm excited to sort of go through that topic. And then secondarily, I get to share my nutrition intern with you today. And so she will be actually interviewing me, and we'll dig into that in a little bit as the show rolls on. But I wanted to also just remind you that I have a free email course going on right now. It's called Nourish Healthy Weight, and it consists of 7 emails covering what needs to be happening in your home in order to nourish a healthy weight in your child. It's not about a diet. It's all about a great food system, a positive feeding strategy, and having a lifestyle infrastructure that supports nourishing your child's health and wellness, and ultimately healthy weight as he grows. You can check that out over on my website, www.jillcastle.com. I hope you do, and I hope I see you inside that course. Today I have a guest, but she is going to be interviewing me. Her name is Katie Bishop, and she's a dietetic intern at Teachers College, Columbia University in New York City. And soon she will be a registered dietitian, and she's been working with me these past couple of weeks, much to my pleasure. And I'm extremely grateful she's done a ton of hard work for me. And her focus has been on sports nutrition for young athletes and learning along the way some of the aspects of running an online business, including podcasting. That's why we thought it would be a great experience for Katie to plan this show and to interview me. So here we go.
Thank you, Jill. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie, and I've put together what I think will be a great episode today. After this episode, I hope you will have learned about not only the different types of diets and supplements that young athletes might be experimenting with today, and why they might be experimenting with these, but also how you can, as parents, help your athlete understand the risks and benefits of dieting and supplement use, and ultimately help your young athletes make healthy decisions that have a positive impact on both their growth and sports performance. I want to start by talking about a report that actually came out 2 years ago, January of 2015. It gathered information from several published research studies on body image and the impact of media in children. The authors of this report found that children as young as 5 years old express body dissatisfaction, and that 1 in 4 children have tried some form of dieting by age 7. That's a total of 25% of 7-year-olds claiming to have dieted in some way at some point. That's a pretty scary thought. As children get older, this number can only go up, and for young athletes, not only do they have to manage the pressure they feel to look a certain way for society, but they are also put under increasing pressure to obtain an ideal body for their sport, and thus athletes are at a higher risk than non-athletes for eating disorders. Another troubling statistic is that there is a widespread use of supplements in adolescents and teen athletes, despite the many health concerns associated with supplement use. It is believed that supplements may be used by as many as 22% to 71% of young athletes. Now, Jill, to dive in your book, Eat Like a Champion, you take us through the ins and outs of how young athletes can properly fuel their bodies and also how the parents can help them do so. However, this can be a really difficult task, especially in today's society. So I was curious, what are some of the main reasons that young athletes experiment with different diets and supplements?
That's a great question. Well, in my research for the book, it's pretty clear that athletes are really motivated by improving their performance, but they're also motivated to improve their appearance, and in some teen athletes to build muscle. So they're under, a lot of exposure to the media, and that media can be really persuasive, especially if the media involves professional athletes who are showcasing this ideal body. And of course, professional athletes are going to have that ideal body. They're paid to have that ideal body, but that can come with a price, especially when we're talking about younger athletes. The other aspect or the other reason why young athletes experiment with different diets are because they have this really sound, big drive to fit in with their peers. They don't want to be left out. They want to be like everyone else. So that's a huge influence as well. If the team is using protein powder to build muscle, then you can probably bank on the fact that at least your teen has thought of doing that as well. And then curiosity definitely plays into why teens might experiment with diets or supplements, and even influences from their coaches or from their parents themselves, especially if parents are misinformed about what the role a diet or supplements has, or the dangers that they may have in a young athlete's life. So whether those are intentionally motivated to get athletes to try diets or supplements, probably not intentionally, but unintended consequences are that sometimes athletes feel that they should be curious and should be trying these things.
Thank you, Jill. It's really interesting to hear how even the coaches and the parents can have a pretty big influence in the teens and adolescents. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the kinds of clients you see who are athletes and some of the different situations you have encountered regarding dieting and supplement use. What would you say are the primary concerns parents come to you with in terms of diets and supplements?
So over the years, I work with children that are infants all the way to adolescents. So when it comes to sports and young athletes, I see kids as young as 6 who are playing recreational soccer and whose parents want them to eat healthy, all the way up to teen athletes who are pre-collegiate, and they are really trying to just take that next step to perform their absolute best. And some teens they don't have their nutrition ducks in a row, so sometimes they come to me and they just want to hone their diet a little bit better, not necessarily go on a diet, but they want to improve their diet to improve their performance. And I've seen all kinds of things over the years. I've seen the sad cases of elite athletes who have failed to grow to their potential in height. And I've seen young athletes who are underweight or who are anemic or who are developing or in the throes of an eating disorder. I've seen all kinds of scenarios play out with young athletes.
So later I want to talk about how we can address those concerns. But first, let's get into the nitty-gritty of dieting and supplements so we can learn a little more about it. So, of course, through my research and nutrition studies, I know that dieting can take on many forms, such as, cutting down on portion sizes, eliminating certain food groups like dairy, or even experimenting with fad diets like the paleo or Atkins or gluten-free. Many athletes might want to become vegetarian or vegan. In your practice, what are different, or what do you know are different forms of dieting, and are there any types in particular that we should be looking out for or especially concerned about in young athletes?
I guess I would approach this question with a prelude, including that I think all athletes should be able and willing to eat all kinds of foods in a healthy balance. And we know certain foods are more inclined to be performance-enhancing foods. Those are foods that are rich in carbohydrate and protein. And there's just a really nice balance that athletes can strike. And it's not just the type of food that they're eating. It's also the timing of when they're eating foods. So when I see an athlete and their parents might be wondering whether they're dieting or they're just coming to me to get a nutrition tune-up, I see certain things that I know are risk factors for dieting, and the athlete himself might not even be realizing that what he's doing could be something that sets him up for disordered eating or even an eating disorder. Things like, and this is really common, skipping meals. So I see athletes skipping breakfast a lot. I see athletes skipping lunch quite a bit, and lunch is sort of that pre-workout meal that's very crucial to having a good training session. I've seen athletes go sugar-free or try the paleo diet or go vegan and cut out all sources of animal products. And those things aren't necessarily bad, but oftentimes those decisions need to be guided by somebody who knows how to include the variety of foods and the nutrients that an athlete would need, not only to perform, but remember, we're talking about teens and kids who are still growing, and so we need to accommodate that growth as well. Another red flag is cutting out certain foods or entire food groups, like not eating any grains. I've seen that before, or only eating protein foods and vegetables, and everything else is gone. That is, in my opinion, a form of dieting. Some athletes might just want to eat clean or eat no candy or no dairy or go and severely cut back their calories. Again, some of these things are most definitely forms of dieting and even precursors to disordered eating and eating disorders. And I think my job is to obviously educate athletes on what their bodies need, not only to perform well, but to also grow well. But also it's to get to the root of the issue and figure out why they're being so restrictive, why they're cutting out foods or food groups, and try to get that understanding so that I can help get them back on a better track with their nutrition plan for growth and exercise.
So you sort of started answering my next question in that previous question, but can you go through with us what the dangers are associated with young athletes dieting?
So I think the biggest long-term danger is the association with disordered eating, which can quickly, unfortunately, snowball into an eating disorder. So I think that's the sort of the long-range danger of some of these behaviors. The other thing is dieting can really have a negative influence on an athlete's performance. So remember, the body needs fuel, and it's just like a car. So a car needs gasoline to go, and the body needs food, which is the fuel for it to go or perform. So anytime an athlete is cutting out certain parts of their fuel or their meal plan, they run the risk of impairing their performance. And I think that is probably, in terms of an athlete who really wants to be the best that they can be, that is the more motivating factor than somebody telling them they're at risk for an eating disorder. That's, I don't find as motivating as really talking to an athlete about how it impacts their performance and what it looks like to eat like a champion, basically. And it means to eat well, eat balanced, and eat frequently throughout the day.
So along the lines of that, we talk a lot about how diets are so can be so bad for young athletes, but is there a situation when dieting can be safe in young athletes? And really, is there a situation in which dieting is recommended?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't really think dieting is beneficial for any youth, whether they're an athlete or not. I do think that some young athletes may benefit from tweaking their nutrition plan for better performance or better balance. For example, if they're eating out a lot, getting back to more home-cooked meals can be beneficial. If there's a lack of fruits and vegetables in the diet, trying to incorporate more of them can be beneficial. Scaling back on sweets or other unhealthy foods, if they tend to be an anchor in the diet, can be beneficial. But dieting, when I think of dieting, I think of calorie reduction for weight loss. And I don't think that's beneficial for an athlete, particularly when they're in season. It can definitely have an immediate impact on their performance level, but in the long term, also their mental state, their relationship with food, their relationship with their own body, and that really has to be just as strong as their meal plan and their workout plan. All of those things are essential for an athlete to be healthy on the inside and out.
So if a young athlete is overweight, say, a 15-year-old ice hockey player, and his performance in the rink would benefit from weight loss, should his parents intervene?
Well, that's another tough question, Katie. My philosophy is, let's look at the nutrition plan. Let's look at the feeding interaction. We know that an ice hockey player is probably getting plenty of exercise. So let's see what the overall day looks like and the balance of food and feeding, and really see if there are areas that we can work on that can be improved. What I find with athletes, and this is just my experience, and other people might have different experiences, but what I find with athletes is there is room for molding the nutritional meal plan into a better place. And because I think young athletes, they're typical kids. So they're eating like a lot of kids out in America are eating. They're eating a lot of snack foods. They're eating a lot of sweets. They might be sitting around a lot after they've been exercising. They might not be getting enough sleep at night. So there's a lot of things, I think, lifestyle-wise, nutrition plan-wise, feeding-wise. And that, when I say feeding, refers to the parents and how the parents are doing with structure and being on time with meals and having family meals together. I think there are a lot of ways that families and athletes can improve. And it doesn't really involve cutting calories to lose weight. It really involves sort of tweaking the overall healthy living approach to help that athlete perform as best as they can perform. And if they end up shaving a few pounds off in the process, that would never be my intention from the get-go, but it could certainly be, and I've certainly seen it be, a side effect of just healthier living and a better nutrition plan.
I kind of want to switch gears for a moment to supplement use, since we've been going pretty heavily into just dieting. But like dieting, supplement use is a huge part of the sports world, especially in young athletes, and many of these so-called performance aids like creatine, HMB, steroids, and stimulants like caffeine are either illegal or likely banned in college and professional athletes. So the answer may be obvious, but I have to ask on behalf of the listeners, what, Jill, is your stance on supplements in the young athlete's diet, and do they fit?
Well, I think that I've always maintained food is fuel and food is first. So I do believe that we can address an athlete's needs for the most part with food. However, there are some instances where an athlete may need a vitamin and mineral supplement or a nutrient supplement. And that could be, for example, in the situation where an athlete eats no fruits and vegetables. That athlete, I'm going to probably put on a multivitamin to cover the missing nutrients because there's a big gap in their diet. Another example is the athlete who may be iron deficient. Generally, food is not really good at correcting an iron deficiency. So we like to put athletes with iron deficiency on an iron supplement to get that iron level back up. And then while at the same time addressing the diet and making sure there are iron-rich foods included in the diet. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, of which I support the stance, does not support the use of any ergogenic aids, which are performance-enhancing supplements, by children and adolescents. And the American College of Sports Medicine does not support the use of creatine in kids and teens under the age of 18. So the other thing that I think is important for parents to understand is that there are inherent risks with supplements. And that can be supplements, even just protein powders. If they have not been tested, they're not well regulated, there is a risk of contamination, and contamination with things like steroids or human growth hormones. So I think that parents have to be really astute about what is in a supplement. And my general advice is to not rely on supplements. Let's see if we can accomplish your performance goals with food.
On that note, there is actually a good amount of information out there on supplements, including in your book, and how they can be dangerous, especially since they aren't regulated very well. I was wondering if you had any experience with an actual client that was using supplements and had any negative side effects.
I have, unfortunately. And most of the experience, I will say, has been with protein supplements. And that's where I seem to have seen most of the clients. Again, I think because I'm working with the younger segment, the teenagers and the middle school kids, that's sort of their supplement of choice, it seems, at least in my experience. But yes, I had one client once who, and unfortunately, the whole family was in favor of this, but he was using a lot of protein supplements. He was using a commercial line, and I can't remember what the commercial line of it was, but it was a line of protein supplements that included powders and bars and shakes, and he was doing all of it. And I think he was around 14. He was a swimmer, and he was basically just getting too much protein. And he started to really struggle with dehydration, which is one of the common side effects of having too much protein in the diet. He wasn't able to stay ahead with his fluid intake. And over time, and again, this was a secondary report to me, but over time, he had done some damage to his cardiac muscle from being from chronic dehydration, and he told me that his physicians thought it was related to that protein supplement use. So there are consequences. I don't have a lot of experience with really negative consequences like that, but just look in the media, you can see all kinds of negative outcomes from abusing supplements or just not even knowing what's in them and using them.
Speaking of not knowing what's in them, I feel like I've read a bunch of articles that always talk about how there's hidden allergens in some of these supplements, and especially herbal supplements too, which, sometimes people forget about are supplements and still aren't regulated. And, that can be scary for parents, especially who have children with allergies that could be life-threatening. So I know sometimes, young athletes might end up using these supplements in secret, whether because they know their parents don't approve or they're sort of still kind of figuring out what it is and what's going on and trying to be independent. So are there any tips you have for us as far as what some things parents should be looking out for?
Right. That's a good question. Yeah, unfortunately, oftentimes when kids are using these supplements, they're sort of under the radar of the parents and the coaches. I know some organizations have had contract signing, have used a contract with all their athletes to reduce the usage of supplements on their teams where they have the athlete sign a contract and the parent as well. And that seems like it would be effective. In terms of recognizing whether your athlete is using supplements, some of the signs you might not even see. Other times you might see that your athlete is struggling with dehydration or might be having, these weird rashes or skin problems because he might be reacting to the ingredients if there's an allergy going on. If a teen is using steroids, some of the things that you should be looking out for are recent increases in weight, especially in muscle size in boys, acne, enlarged breasts in boys, body hair in girls, erratic mood swings, although those can be really difficult to tease out in the teenager because I think that goes part and parcel with being a teenager. Irritability, intense anger, anxiety, depression, restlessness. Those are sort of the highlights of steroid use. And, again, I think I'm a mom of 4 teens. 4 out of the 4 participate in sports. And so I think that supplement use and dieting, these are big topics and they're not taboo to talk about. Parents should be having these conversations with their athletes. It's part of just the culture of the sport. And it's something that you want to talk about, just like you would talk about how to respond to a predator with your child, how to be prepared if somebody offers your child candy and tries to kidnap them. I mean, these are part of the culture of sports, dieting and supplement use. So I think that it's really important for parents to have a handle on this and to be having these conversations with their athletes. So it is out in the open. So it's not a big secret. So it's not a big, oh my God, we had no idea this was going on with our child. So that's something that's really, really important.
Those are some really great tips and some important things I think we all really need to remember. And now I really want to take a look at the bigger picture of diets and supplements together. There are so many factors that contribute to body dissatisfaction and ultimately dieting, of which the media is certainly one factor, but also peers and family members, including the parents, tend to have a very large influence. And I want to know, what role do peers specifically play in a young athlete's decision to use diets as supplements or to experiment with diets?
Yeah, well, I think peers have a huge influence. In fact, I remember hearing from one of my acquaintances that one of my friends that she had heard as a parent that somebody was importing a powder to add to her water to make her faster. I mean, so there's this stuff is going on, and you better believe if there's one kid on the team who's using supplements, probably all the kids on the team know about it, and at a minimum are thinking about it and questioning whether they should or they should not. So again, teens, middle schoolers, and adolescent teens are very socially motivated. It's part of their development. So they are socially motivated. They're also risk takers, and they're also really independent. So those are sort of those 3 core developmental cornerstones to being a teen, and put those together and you can see how using supplements and diets can really take a stronghold because it feeds into those 3 developmental cornerstones. In high school, the pressure to fit in, and this is in middle school too, can be overwhelming, and it can interfere with good nutrition and good decisions around nutrition. So a lot of actions, a lot of the reasons why a teen might do something are centered around reward, especially for teens. That can range from eating unhealthy food because it tastes good, and that's the inherent reward, is the taste, or skipping lunch because everybody else is skipping lunch, and that's the reward. They're fitting in. So those, remembering that your teen is probably not doing this to be bad or to risk his life or to go down the bad path. They're doing it because they're socially motivated and they're reward sensitive and they're trying to make decisions on their own, even though they might not have the information that they need to make good decisions. That's where you come in, and appreciating that their peers are going to be a big influence on the decisions they make as athletes and around their nutrition is something to really keep on top of.
When I was younger, my mother would go on diets here and there, including the Atkins diet at one point, I remember. And although at the time I honestly didn't really understand why she was dieting, I mean, she looked totally fine to me. It certainly made me interested in what was going on. And I remember in high school, going to the cafeteria, oh, maybe I should get a turkey and cheese roll up today, skip the roll. That's what my mom's doing. I'm curious to hear what you think about how, parents might be influencing their young athletes to decide to diet or experiment with supplements. And also, in addition to that, are there any behaviors that parents are doing unknowingly that might influence their athlete? And do you have any sort of tips for parents on how to, go about addressing that and changing their children's attitudes towards them?
In terms of parents influencing their young athletes' decision to diet, I think it's our job as a parent. We're role models, whether we like it or not. So what we do trickles down to our children. And again, it's the example that you're setting day in and day out. If you're a dieter, your child's exposed to that, your teen's exposed to that. They see that as part of their day-to-day norm, and it's more likely probably that they will be dieters as well. Although, peers are a big, strong, main influencer of teens' attitudes and decisions, parents are still a major influence as well. So, I don't know a lot of parents that are using supplements and protein powders and things like that, but I do know a fair number of parents who are pretty active. And even just in your activity, if you're well balanced in it and it's part of your day-to-day life, but it's not consuming your day-to-day life and it's not something that you just are not going to have a good day unless you have that episode of exercise or what have you. I think those are things to think about because, again, those things are part of the foundation of what your child's growing up with. I think always that there are behaviors and actions that parents might not know that they're doing that does influence their young athletes' interest in dieting or using supplements. I mean, I think that, again, if a parent's on a diet, like you mentioned, Katie, I think kids notice that. Whether they act on it or not is a whole different thing. But they notice. And so I think as a parent, you don't always know what your child's going to do with that information. Is your child the child that's going to then go on a diet too? Or is your child the child that's just going to notice and be curious and move on with life? So I think as a parent, you don't really know how your child's going to respond. So it behooves us all, I'm a parent too, obviously, to play it safe, to be on the safe side, to be that good positive role model, to lead a healthy life by example. And, if parents are sort of absorbed in the way they look, the dieting culture, or they're over-exercising, or they are constantly putting themselves down for the way that they look or their lack of exercise. Again, remember, your children moms think they're the queen of the universe and their dads are the king of the universe, and so that they cannot do really anything wrong. And so when you put yourself down, it can be confusing for your teen and your child. So I would say that many of us as parents can sort of do a self-check and just make sure that we're not being too focused on our own bodies or the bodies of other women or men. And we're not being too focused on healthy food versus bad food, good food, bad food. That there's just this attitude of openness and acceptance and balance that I think can really be a good service to our athletes in general.
Thanks, Jill. Those are all really helpful things to hear. I mean, I think a lot of times we forget about how much influence we have just on anyone around us. And, a lot of stuff we just do out of habit and we kind of don't think about, that influence. I definitely want to talk about, dieting and supplement use as it relates specifically to boys versus girls. Do you see a difference? And, we talk a lot about diet specifically as they relate to girls, but, are boys also dieting a lot? Is there a difference between what kind of diets they do? Or, what are things that you see coming up?
Well, that's a good question. So what I see is that boys do it differently. And I do think that they are manipulating their diet in different ways. So boys are really focused on leaning out. So really the muscle tone, muscle building. So they tend to gravitate towards eating a lot of protein. That's what I see. I can't give you any statistical or research backup, but that's what I'm seeing in my practice is that boys do tend to be very concerned about their muscles, and they want to build them up and they want to lean them out, and so they look to protein, additional protein to do that. And what I end up talking with boys about a lot is that the amount of protein you eat, there's a threshold level that you need, and above that you don't use and you don't store, and you basically, your body eliminates it, and it ends up being a lot of extra nutrition that you probably don't need that costs quite a bit of money. And boys oftentimes don't understand that just eating more protein does not translate to more muscle. They have this very linear thinking about protein. They think eat more protein equals more muscle, and it doesn't. It's the exercise that builds the muscle. So, and that exercise building muscle, the foundation of that is a good, healthy, balanced diet. So I guess, high school males are definitely at risk for dieting. There's some statistics that suggest 10 to 15% of high school males who participate in a weight-sensitive sport admit to practicing unhealthy weight loss behaviors. So, and that number might even be larger. So, yeah, I think we do worry a lot about the females because we know about the female athlete triad and we know about disordered eating and eating disorders, but you're right. We should be paying just as much attention to boys because they can be just as aggressive in their eating behaviors as girls can be.
In terms of sort of talking about this with your kids and bringing up diets or supplements, should parents be approaching the subject matter differently for their sons or daughters?
No, I actually don't think that they should be doing it differently. I think it should be equal opportunity, that everybody gets the same talk. I think it's very helpful for families to have a stance on supplements and dieting. I feel like in this world, especially with so much media pressure and for teens with peer pressure, it's in a lot of ways almost easier to be able to say, oh, my family won't let me do that, or my family doesn't believe in that, or my family is very against that. I know that for my own children, we've had those conversations. They know that that's a no-go with us, and we have a family policy about that. And I think that's been really helpful because it gives them a little bit of a security blanket. When the pressure's high, they've got something to fall back on. They've got a family policy or a family mantra, or parents that have laid down the rule and they know what the rule is. I think when we don't talk about it, we don't have any kind of policy about it or stance about it as parents, then kids are left to flounder and figure it out on their own, and they don't always do so well without that guidance.
I want to jump back really quickly. Before we talked about things you should look out for in terms of supplement use, but I think it's really important to let everyone know, what are things that we should be looking out for when it comes to signs of eating disorders or disordered eating developing.
I think in terms of disordered eating, anytime that your child is skipping meals, if they are obviously losing weight, if they are really cutting down on their portions and what they will eat. If they're not coming to the dinner table anymore when they used to, if they're sitting there and they're saying they're not hungry and they're really just not eating. Other signs could be that they are using laxatives or diuretics, appetite suppressants. So those are basically dieting pills. Anytime you find something like that, if they are isolating, so if they're eating alone, they're going to their room and they are just sort of avoiding the social aspect of meals, that can be a red flag as well. And then if you're obviously noticing weight loss, that's a big red flag. So those are all things to pay attention to. There's some great resources we should include in the show notes about from the National Eating Disorders Association for the signs of an eating disorder and the signs of disordered eating. Those would be useful links to include to the listeners. That's, oftentimes there's not just one sign. It's sort of more than one sign, and they're all sort of becoming very apparent all at once. And all of a sudden the parent's saying, oh my gosh, there's really something going on here, and I'm not sure exactly what it is. Even if your athlete doesn't have any of these signs, it's good to know what the signs are, just so you're prepared as a parent.
Thanks for sharing that with us. I wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page because, I'm sure many of you know, no matter what you say, your young athlete may still want to continue forward with his or her diet or, supplement of choice. I want to kind of end the show on a note where parents can take away with them things that they can do to sort of support their athlete in a positive way and sort of guide them in the right direction. The first thing I'm kind of wondering is how parents can work with their child's curiosity while also promoting a supplement-free household. What are some things that they can do?
Sure. So I think it all boils down to having a great nutrition plan for your family. So a wide variety of different foods in the diet can cover all the different nutrient needs that are needed for optimal sports performance, including hydration, consistent meals and snacks throughout the day. Those things are going to shake out to great energy for your athlete. If you have an athlete who's concerned about getting more protein, don't use protein powders. Try protein-rich foods such as milk or chocolate milk, eggs, lentils, beans, poultry, fish, nut butters. There's a lot of great protein sources that not only are food sources, but we all know eating food is far more satisfying than incorporating protein powder into a smoothie. I mean, it's way more satisfying to eat a piece of peanut butter toast and a glass of chocolate milk than a scoop of protein powder. So I'm a big food fan because I love how satisfying it is. If somebody is using HMB, you can swap out with citrus fruits like orange or grapefruit. Again, the other aspect of supplements, if you're super anti-no and very authoritarian about it, that might backfire and your child might go ahead and sneak behind your back. So again, try to keep that communication open and that trust, that relationship of support and understanding there for your child. Tell stories, tell true stories of supplements, share your concerns, give them real life examples and evidence of what could happen in a way that isn't scary or threatening or kind of in a smarty pants way, like, oh, look, this is what we know. I told you not to do this. They are by nature going to make their own decisions and their own choices, and they're probably going to make some mistakes. I mean, as a mom of 4 teenagers, I can tell you they make mistakes and they learn though, and you just don't want it to be a costly mistake. So that's where having that trustful, open communication is really important. And I interviewed a therapist on communicating with your teen. We should include that in the show note link also, because there are ways to communicate with your teen that are very productive, that really encourage a good response from the team. And then negotiate. You can inform your child, give your opinions. Again, if he's going to try it, that is per parent. That is your decision as a parent. Some parents may want to allow their child to try it with their supervision. Other parents may not want their child to try it. I think that each parent has that decision to make on their own, but it's a tricky topic. I would just encourage parents to be wide-eyed open and aware and in tune with what their athletes are doing and how they're nourishing their body, and definitely send the message and the attitude that food is where it's at, and anything you want to accomplish, we can accomplish with food.
So in preparing for this podcast, I actually spoke with a lot of my friends about things that we did when we were in middle school and high school, and how it definitely impacted our parents. And one of my friends brought up a really great question, was that her mom was really concerned about cooking, because my friend actually went vegan for, a year, I think, in high school. Mm-hmm. So of course that's a drastic change if your family eats meat all the time or dairy, things like that. So, her mom was really, confused about how, do I have to do extra shopping, grocery shopping? Do I have to cook my daughter one meal for her and then a meal for everyone else? How can busy parents sort of juggle that and try and incorporate their child's needs?
That's a good question. I am of the belief that it's one meal for the whole family, and you make that whole family meal work for everyone. So here's how I would play that out. I'm a huge fan of family style meals, and we can also give a link in the show notes about that. There's a blog post about that. I'm a huge fan of it. I do it with my own family. And basically, in planning the meal, parents consider the preferences of all family members. So if you have a child who's vegetarian, for example, she's going to be eating that same family meal. It's just that the parent is going to plan a meal that's going to cover all the family needs. So the main entree or the protein source might be chicken and beans, for example. The grain might be rice. The vegetable might be a green tossed salad. The fruit might be sliced strawberries. And the dairy might be milk to drink, or it could be cheese, shredded cheese or something like that. But the meal plan itself is balanced and it accommodates the needs of everybody. So when you have meat and beans on the table, that means anybody can eat the meat and the beans. The vegetarian can eat the beans, and so can the non-vegetarian. So you're feeding the whole family. You're making a meal that accommodates everyone and everyone sits around it. So yeah, cooking is a big thing. I think a lot of parents can get hung up with cooking, not only just from a special dietary need thing, but also just if you're a parent of a sports playing kid, you're in the car a lot after school and there's not a whole lot of time for cooking. So cooking can be a pain point for a lot of parents of athletes because they want to provide nutritious meals, but they don't have the kind of time that they feel like it takes. But nutritious meals don't have to be fancy and gourmet. They just need to be nicely balanced. And it's just as important as that all the food groups or most of the food groups are on the table, as much as it is that everybody's around it and together. And then the other thing I would say is that with teens, they really should be cooking at this point and learning how to cook. And so I would encourage teen athletes to start taking the helm at preparing meals on their own, because they're going to head off to that next phase of life where they are young adults and they will be responsible for their own nutrition. So learning how to do that is an important part of adolescence as well.
Thank you, Jill, so much for sharing your expertise with me and your listeners today. I think we learned a lot of great points about a topic that, in my opinion, isn't talked about enough with even experts and within the family. If there is anything parents should take home from today's episode, it seems that parents should remember that they do have a great influence on their child's curiosity and interest in diets and supplement use, whether or not they realize it. And, it's important to maintain that open dialogue and trust with children to avoid anyone sneaking around or, just doing anything that's not that great, behind closed doors. And also it's important that we don't forget about the boys because, they too are experimenting with dieting and supplements. And even though it might be in a different way, it still might not be beneficial to health and growth and performance. And we want to treat everyone the same, approaching the topic with your children, with a group mentality. And, definitely the cooking thing I think was a great point to cover at the end because that's definitely a tough spot for a lot of people. So I just want to remind you, we have some great resources in the show notes for you. We're going to have some resources on, different things you can look up for diets, how to make sure that your child's getting all the right nutrients with the different, if your child wants to try vegetarian, something like that. We'll include about, resources for eating disorders and, from the previous podcast, about, how to talk to your children about different topics. And, some cookbooks that you can look at maybe to help your kids get interested in cooking as well. And so, lastly, again, my name is Katie, and, thank you so much for allowing me to interview you today, Jill. I think it's, safe to say again that we all learned a lot from you today.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Katie. It was great to be interviewed. It was really fun. So you all know the Nourished Child Podcast is one of my little babies. You can help the Nourished Child Podcast grow by writing a review on iTunes, subscribing to the show on iTunes, Android, Stitcher Radio, Google Play Music, TuneIn, and more. Share the podcast if you would like on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Instagram, wherever you hang out. I would love for you to do that. And as always, thanks for joining us today. I'm so glad you were here. Please be sure to give the child in your life, big or small, and even that athlete you love so much, a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child, inside and out.